Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 273, Magic and Fetishism. This is a 69-page booklet. It's very, very amusing. It's not actually about that kind of fetish, though. I'll get into what it actually means. There's a link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links are to my books blogs. Haven't made the blog post yet. I believe this will probably go onto the academic header, although technically it's folklore as well. Now, this is a collection of mythological materials that deal with simple charms, fetishes in the initial sense, what it meant back then 100 years ago. It's sort of like the term gay back then meant happy. The term fetish back then would be like a charm or a voodoo doll, something like that. And it actually does mention voodoo here briefly. One of the funniest stories here, and a lot of it has to do with tribes that were being contacted. This is the colonial era, the early 20th century. One of the funniest stories is, I guess, at one point an anchor was found by some tribe, some largely uncontacted tribe, and they weren't worshiping it, but it was seen as a symbol of good luck. And at one point somebody broke a chunk off of this anchor inadvertently and then died, and this was considered to be particularly meaningful as far as luck goes. Now you have this sort of thing as little totems, and there are all sorts of little spells and incantations that this lists. A lot of it has to do with West African tribes and groups from Asia, especially within the larger Indian subcontinent. Of course, back then, India hadn't broken free from Pakistan. They were one country, or rather, Pakistan technically from India. Whichever side you ask, you'll get a different explanation. These countries were all one. It was just India. And so there's a lot of difference between the Islamic culture there, sort of the charms and so forth that would be used there. The charms would be used in a more Hindu location, and some of these other tribal regions that would have fallen under neither and been really basically based on ancestor worship in some cases. It's very interesting to see that interplay. Altogether an interesting work. It mentions Italy as well. As far as the European context, it mainly mentions Italy. The concept of the evil eye there is something Leland talked about, and that was very much in vogue at the time. You've got to understand, this is the era in which they're studying the witch tradition there. It's also the era in which the English are sort of looking at their own folklore and the folklore of the British Isles and trying to compile everything, because they're starting to get anxious about the industrial era divorcing them from their spiritual roots, and so they're trying to compile everything in books, which I think is very wonderful. Unfortunately, in some cases, they misconstrued foreign cultures' practices. Here, though, it's largely absent the ethnocentrism you do see in some of the contemporary works on foreign cultures. It's very much a cosmopolitan work, because all it does is it puts those spells together, these various practices. We might term them root work in some cases in the modern sense of occultism. It puts them together and simply compiles them as is and doesn't really attempt to make any larger philosophical point about them. Some of these works, though, did. Some of them were very much like, well, this spell shows us why white Christian civilization is superior or something, or this tribe hasn't yet developed monotheism, and this is, holding them back politically. And it was very funny. But this one actually manages not to do that. So again, 69 pages, so an intermediate little read. A link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my books, blogs. Again, not fetishism in the modern sense. Has nothing to do with that. It has to do with specifically little physical objects, good luck charms, voodoo dolls, things of that nature. That's about all. Peace out.